What's going on, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the podcast. Hello, how are you today? I'm your host, Mitch Corbett, and this week was the Royal Rumble, the famous pay-per-view, the Royal Rumble, this past weekend. And although, in my personal humble opinion, the show wasn't as great as it could have been, I wanted to keep that wrestling theme going, and so I wanted to bring you guys to our guest, Old School Jim Connolly. Old School is a professional wrestling referee here in Ontario, and he's been around for years, decades, if that. And he's wrestled or refed. Sorry, he's refed some really fantastic matches. He has a ton of stories to tell. He's also a teacher or a former teacher, and so we talk a little bit about that as well. And if it was possible to mention his teaching background with his refereeing background, it's a good conversation. He's always been a real cool, chill dude with me when I was wrestling in Ontario, and I hope you guys enjoy this conversation with Old School Jim Connolly. So, ready to start?
Anytime. I have no idea what to expect.
All right, well, welcome to the podcast, everyone. I'm here with referee and teacher Jim Connolly, a professional wrestling referee Jim Connolly. And welcome to the podcast. It's called Hello, How Are You Today? So we start always with that. Hello, how are you today there, Jim?
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. So we've had many interactions at independent shows. You've refed a bunch of shows that I think I've been on or have. You've refed some of my matches and everything, the few that I had in Ontario. But you were like DDP when it comes to refereeing. Like, you didn't start until later on in life. So what made you want to become a professional wrestling referee?
Well, I was an elementary school teacher, but always a wrestling fan. So I've been going down to Maple Leaf Gardens when I lived in Toronto, probably at 13 and 14, by myself on the subway. You never thought about it. I lived at Finch and Yonge, so going all the way down there. But you never thought about it. It was fun. So it was we're talking 1970, 69-ish. So it wasn't really cool to say you were a wrestling fan in high school. So you'd meet people who went to Wrestling Weekly, and those became your friends. So it's not really different than now. But I met a guy, and we were the two quiet guys. We were the guys who stood back, never talked to anybody, but we would talk to each other quietly. Because even the fans became celebrities, right? So Terry Dart and all these big names, and Elio Zarlinga and stuff, who ended up being Frank Tunney's assistant, or Jack Tunney's assistant. So
that legendary
my friend was
Jack Tunney.
Yeah, my friend was a guy named Ron Hutchison.
Oh.
And Ron Hutchison ended up becoming a wrestler. Now, I don't know him. I don't know where he lives. We just would meet at the gardens and say hi, and we were quiet and shy. And he ended up being the wrestler, and then he ended up being the trainer of Trish Stratus and Edge and Christian and Johnny
many more.
Many, many more. So we never really kept in touch until there was the Extreme ECW show in Buffalo, and he was going to do a bus tour. So I wrote him. I gave him a shout on the email, and he remembered me from 30 years before. So I went down with his group to watch the CCW show, and then we became friendly again. It was like we hadn't missed a beat. And 30 years later, we sat there with our buddy Charles, and we just, cut apart the ECW show because he was a traditionalist, as I am. And what happened was, I'm 67 now. I was 45, and I said, "Is there anything I can do to get into wrestling?" I said, "I'm an elementary school teacher. I'm happy doing that, but I've got time off." Well, summer comes, I've got the summer off, and he writes me and says, "Come on down to the CNE. We're doing a wrestling thing." So I went down, and I'm watching, and he just said, "Do you have running shoes in your car?" I said, "Well, yeah." He says, "Well, you're reffing the next match." I said, "Pardon me?" So he handed me the traditional opening referee, which means the Foot Locker shirt. So I had the Foot Locker shirt on with I think I might have even had jeans on, because I had no idea, zero idea. I had no desire to be a referee. I got in the ring. My first match was Sin Bodhi, who was Kazarni in WWE, and a guy named BJ Singh, a very underrated, very good wrestler who just passed away recently. And it was a 15-minute draw, and that's how it began. 22 years later, I'm the oldest active active referee in Ontario today. So I still work. I worked up until a couple of weeks ago. So there you go.
So, like, when you're watching the wrestling shows at Maple Leaf Gardens, which, you know, I thankfully got to see an event play there. I got to see the Leafs back in the day. Historic venue. Like, kind of give me an idea of the feel for a show there, because I have to get, because that's before kayfabe was broken, and that's before like you knew it was like a worked thing. I mean, how cool must that have been?
I don't know if I appreciate it as much as I do now. Excuse me, but I don't know what your fan base is. But if you're a wrestling fan, goosebumps. I mean, they had the ramp that went to the ring, and I was lucky enough to see Whipper Billy Watson and Johnny Valentine. No, not Greg, his dad. And some of those guys, they would wear the long robes. And remember, anybody, even if you're not a big wrestling fan, you know the entrance, there's no music.
Wow.
Music came in the 70s. There was no music.
And this is when they're like larger.
Billy Watson come out, just automatic goosebumps. This guy was, excuse me, was voted #1 athlete in Toronto, beating Dave Keon during the Stanley Cup era. So that's how popular Whipper Billy Watson was, and how wrestling was looked at. It was a sport, not sports entertainment.
And this is like, you know, they're larger than life, right? Like you don't know about their personal lives, you don't know their real names. It's like what you see is what you get in the ring, and so that's.
And when you say larger than life, you have to remember the wrestlers back then. Even though they, you know, we always a big joke in wrestling is, how much do you weigh, kid? 190. Okay, you're 200. You just automatically add 10 pounds just to make it bigger. But back then, an average guy was 230 pounds. They were big. So when you met your legends, they were bigger than you. Now I'm, you know, 5'11"-ish. At least I used to be until I started shrinking. And now I'm about maybe 187, somewhere in there. My high school graduating weight, so that shows you, 187 or so. And I was dwarfed by them. Now in the ring, one of the knocks against me as a referee is that I'm bigger than half the talent, because the wrestlers now are 160, 170 pounds. Well, not you, Mitch, but some.
Hey, I'm working on it. Okay, new year, new me, you son of a bitch.
Yeah.
That's why I shaved.
Some things never change.
That's why I shaved my head, just to lose a little bit of weight.
Yeah, look. No.
So comment. I mean, but like, all right. So like, you started being all right. So like, it's such a weird, like, your story is so fascinating because like, getting into wrestling. Like, what was the year that you started refereeing at?
I started in 2000. I've refereed 2,247 matches.
Okay, so like, but in 2000, it's still kind of like an old school kind of era of wrestling where, like, you know, you had to pay your dues, kind of like, well, you always had to pay your dues, honestly. But like, I imagine it was a little bit different for a 44-year-old man to start paying his dues when he's had all his life experience and been a teacher his entire life, telling people what to do.
It's been tough. I still think it's tough for me. I don't really fit in. I don't know why you and I got along so well. It was just sort of one of those, there's about 5 wrestlers in the business that I just automatically have a relationship with, and you're one of them. Yeah. And I think it was just a sense of humor and realizing that we don't take life too seriously. I take wrestling seriously, but I don't take, you know, in general, if I make a mistake, you know, it happened. Yeah, it was tough for me because, first of all, Ron Hutchison goes in the dressing room. Christian happened to be watching. So there's my first match. And he looks at the dressing room and says to them, "This is Jim. He knows more about wrestling than you ever will. So listen to him." So that put me in such a crap position.
Way to put a fucking sniper bullet on my.
I have so much heat with some of the wrestlers still because of that, because they didn't really. It was a great. I know what he was trying to do, and Ron's a good friend of mine. We go to Vegas every year to Cauliflower Alley, a wrestling reunion thing, but it put me in a really bad position because the wrestlers really didn't respect me after that.
No, do you think that was a test for you or a test for the wrestlers to show someone who's older than them respect? Like,
I don't know
who's in it for like the.
I think it was more of a, hey, listen to this guy. You know, he looks like, you know, doesn't look like he knows much, but he's been around and he's been a fan for 30 years, and you know, he knows a lot about wrestling. But I think he didn't think of the repercussions, which was I looked like the promoter's stooge. And that put me in position. Plus my age. I was 45 at the time. I'm 67 now. The old veterans, like you were talking about in the early days when I watched wrestling in the 60s and 70s, that's the age I should be.
And like most of the referees, like back in those days, were also like handlers for the wrestlers, were they not? Like it wasn't just a referee position.
Well, it could be depending where you were. The cool thing about back in the day was the Toronto referees would referee whatever came in. And what I mean by that is, I'll give you the example because I'll give you the names. It was when I first watched, it was Fred Atkins and Pat Flanagan. Those were the referees. Both
famously Rex Atkins' dad. Yeah.
Well, his biggest influence. Hey, I'll give you a quick aside story that I remember. Jim McKenney, my very favorite hockey player of all time with the Leafs. At one time, Fred Atkins was brought in as the Buffalo Sabres training guy, but he also went down and did the Leafs for 1 year. And some of the guys gave him a hard time. And I think it was McKenney. I don't know why, just because he's my favorite player. But they laughed and said, this 75-year-old guy didn't look like anything. They said, okay, we'll give you a push-up contest. If I win, then we don't do any more training for the day. And McKenney had to miss the next game because Fred Atkins was still going. so he was a tough son of a gun. But as a referee, he was slow, and when he hit the mat, you didn't hear it, and there was a lot of things there. But if an NWA champion came in or whatever came in, WWF back in the day, or AWA, at one point we got all the people, and they would come in to us, and the referees would be their referees. Nobody flew in their own referees. So for instance, now when you go to see WWE, you're not going to see a Toronto referee there, unless it happens to be Daryl, who is a WWE referee. But you didn't have that.
Hornet, right?
Yeah. So I mean, it's just a totally different thing, and it's sad for me because as a Toronto referee around for that, would have been nice when TNA came in that I had a chance to referee, or when WWE came in, they would have to find a referee in Toronto. So it was a possibility. It's not a possibility anymore, which is so sad. So yeah. So I mean, for me and Canadians, of course, because of visa issues, it's hard to get into the States. So I don't know if people know that or not, but you don't see a lot. I mean, it's so nice to see Josh Alexander finally make it the best wrestler I've ever refereed on a regular basis. And I've said it for years and years and years. So he's with TNA now, or Impact, whatever they call it this week. And yeah,
it's Impact Wrestling, available Thursdays, I think 8 on Fight Network somewhere. Shit, I should know this. Anyways,
on Game TV too, and yeah, I don't watch it. Oops, should I not say that? Sorry, guys. Sorry,
Josh, like life is so busy, especially when you're trying to just survive. Like don't have time to watch everything.
The differences. Right? That's one of the differences. We would watch wrestling on a weekend, so I would watch about 7 hours of wrestling, and each show was different. So you'd watch WWF from Pittsburgh. You'd watch not from Pittsburgh TV. It was just a Pittsburgh feed. You'd watch NWA, you'd watch NWF from Buffalo, NWA from Toronto, which was Maple Leaf Wrestling before it was WW.
Okay, so let me ask you this. So like you watched that product, you got to see it with like the very minimal lights, very minimal camera work. And now you see today's product, which is AEW, WWE, Impact, ROH, New Japan. Like there's so much content available. And now I know you're an old school guy, but I feel like you're also the type that you're not gonna say, oh, they're doing it wrong. But
no. I love the new stuff. I knew and exactly what you said. That 2021 means content. So all they want is content. I don't understand it because I came from, and this is where I was trying to say earlier, the old veterans don't respect me because I go down to the Vegas and they don't respect me because I never did the territories. The new guys think I'm way too old and out of touch. So I don't really fit in with anybody. Are you
sure of that? Because are you sure that people aren't asking you to tell stories? Because I mean, that's why I wanted to have you on. Because we're just telling.
Never. Well, on podcasts. I've done a bunch of podcasts, but this one's the best one though.
You shut your fucking mouth. All right, so let me ask you this. So like the difference.
What I meant by content, I'll just finish my thought. In the old days, it was an hour show and it was an infomercial to go to the arena live. That's what it was. That's why you heard the term jobber, which I don't like. It's an enhancement worker, and I know quite a few of them in Toronto, Tim Gerard and Alex Great, Alexander the Great, and those guys. They were, Bobby Bass. Oh my gosh, I remember I was in a dressing room once and they kind of didn't give the respect to Bobby, that they didn't know who he was. I'm going, I just took a bunch of them aside and said, okay, how many of you worked in front of 18,000 people? Okay, then shut your mouths, because he has worked at Maple Leaf Gardens. How do I know? Because I have his autograph. I have Bobby Bass's autograph. Peace and love, Bobby Bass. That was when he did his hippies. He had a little hippie era there but he didn't win very many matches, not in Toronto anyways, but he was a well-respected veteran. And he probably, as I said, you could have a career and not win that many matches. Because you just traveled from place to place. You won in this area, you lost in this area, you just wanted to work. So you wanted to feed your family. That's what wrestling's all about. It's about, the money, except unless you're a referee. But yeah.
And so speaking of that, like you're talking about enhancing talent, guys that, were there to make the star shine. Another important cog in that machine is the referee. And you were kind of thrown into the fire, not like, I'm sure you knew the basics, but like there's an art form to being a good professional referee. So like how much have you learned? How much have you forgotten? Like, what was that experience like actually deciding like, oh, I'm going to go into it now? Cause like you could have just done that one CNA show and then just like, oh, I did it once in my life. I can say I did
exactly
it.
What I thought it was.
But you decided to keep on going with it, and you've improved over the years that now you're booked on most shows.
Well, I do have some bitterness against my first 10 years because I really wasn't taught anything, and I did it on my own. And I look back and cringe and probably some of the matches I did with you, even I cringe because I probably took more of the limelight than I should have. And in 2010, and I'm lying because I have no idea, but I think it was around then, Jim Corderas had finally left WWE. And, Jim Corderas at one point was the longest reigning referee in WWE history, from Toronto. And it was a friend of mine who hired him, so a little bit of bitterness there. But he did a seminar, and it was the first referee training that a lot of us in Ontario ever had. And it was a who's of Ontario indie referees who went there for this. Sam Sino up in your way was there, and Brian Renda, and a bunch of guys. Dave Dredd.
All very good dudes too.
We've been poking around for years, but none of us really had training, and nobody cared. If front row of a wrestling match, hey, let's get my cousin out here to ref. And that's actually how I made my comeback, which is another good story, but I'll tell you that later if you want. But yeah, that's the first training I had. And then, not that you took everything, Daryl from NXT and now WWE, I think, more and more, did a seminar recently. And I told him, I said, I'm not going to get much out of this because you're teaching a different kind of refereeing. There used to be just one kind, but now there's TV refereeing. And it's a different ball game. And you're doing WWE, which have very, very strict rules because Vince is very much on the rules. He has his hands on anything. You listen to Cornette or any of those guys, they'll tell you Vince micromanages every little thing. And nothing wrong with that. It's his company and he's successful. So why would you change a winning formula? But, he's very, very, where Daryl will say, here's what you do in reffing. And I'm going, well, not in indie, you don't. In indie reffing, there is,
but there are tools that you can take.
There's not a count out for a main event. Sorry.
But there are tools that you can take from TV and add indie and vice versa.
Absolutely, like little things. But some of the rules he was saying, I was just going. I didn't say it to him because I didn't want to, take any heat away from him, but or any shine. But he was, and the young guys have a chance to make it. I don't have a chance to go anywhere, but
and there's always Border City Wrestling. There's always Impact. There's Smash. There's tons of great product in Ontario that get you on TV. So
yeah. Oh, I know. Absolutely. I've been on TV several times on little things, and I've had. I actually did referee a TNA World Champion match through some luck, and and it was an amazing experience, which was Jeff Jarrett versus Sabu versus Rhino versus Samoa Joe in a tables match. That was pretty exciting.
So let's talk about that. That's such a mix of like old school, new school wrestling. Like you have almost a wrestler from each decade kind of thing in that.
But
match.
That was back in the day when it was an actual TNA, not Impact. And the belt was heavy. I don't have a picture of it because my first 10 years, you got to remember, cell phones weren't around. Not the kind that we have now that you take a picture of everything in every part of your life. Back in the day, you had to have like a 35 millimeter camera, and I didn't carry one. I was at the match that I was doing was a publicity for the Fight Network, which was the Fight Network launch party. mm-hmm. at the warehouse in front of about 1,000 people. And you'd think, I mean, I just relaxed. I went, oh, I came out, they opened up the curtain and it was Bret Hart on this side and Jimmy Hart on this side. Is there a picture of that anywhere? Nope.
There's got to be an event photographer somewhere that has photos somewhere down the line.
Nope. And it was for the media. That was the whole idea. So I was like, I've got a bad picture of me with Rhino. It's Rhino's leg and me, and that's about it. So, I mean, that happened a lot in my first 10 years. I had some really pictures that I would love to have seen, but just nobody took pictures back then.
Now let's talk about the physicality of being a professional referee. Like, you started at 44. I don't know what kind of shape you were in back then, but you're keeping yourself in better shape now with the Zoom and everything. But talk about the physical toll that, refereeing takes on you. Cause I mean, like, it's your joints, it's your elbow and your hand and your knees getting up and down. And it's a lot harder than I think people give.
The first year I had a bruise on my forearm. Because of the 1, 2, 3, and because the one piece of advice I got was hit the mat harder. So I did, and I was doing 6 to 7 matches a day every day during the CNE. I only did about 5 days in the first year, maybe 10 the second year, and maybe 12 the last year, because I had to go back to school, right? So you have to have that week to prepare. But I mean, my worst. I'll start with the minimum, then I'll give you a good story. I think it's a good story anyways. So, I mean, the physicality, of course. I mean, I'm a 67-year-old man with 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds. So, I mean, just what I tell the referees around Ontario, because there's a lot of really good ones, but they all are too heavy, in my humble opinion. Now, I have a little gut, but I hide it pretty good. And I do, as you said, I do Zumba, but I also weight lift. I also do the elliptical. I do lots of things like that. And I do pride myself on keeping myself in shape, even when I taught. So I don't want to hear the excuse, well, you're retired. I mean, yeah, that's an advantage. Actually, while I was waiting for you, I was doing push-ups. So yeah, I do, a lot of exercise, but the gyms are closed to me just as much as they are to you. So, I mean, I haven't, I only been going for the last couple of months. It was Omicron. I guess I'm not going to be even doing that for a while. But yeah, you have to keep physical. Now I've had, I remember if I'm going to drop a name here, Rosemary from Impact.
Look at my Courtney Rush.
Yeah, Courtney Rush. I know.
Lovely human being.
She'll always be that. But she looked at my knee one day and said, your knee is swollen. And I had no idea. So I'm 10 years, 15, maybe 12 years in. And somebody said, oh, you don't wear knee pads? I had no idea.
Jim, you were wearing knee pads.
Nobody told me.
Oh,
so I didn't know, unless you have somebody telling you. So as I said, I'm a little bitter at people.
But that's how you do that sweet slide into a cover, is with the knee pads.
Yeah,
knee pads
I know.
Just slide in, I go 1, 2.
Yeah, it's really cool with them on my bare knees. But whatever, that was one injury I had. But other than that, I've been pretty good. A few, ankle twists and things like that. You get into awkward positions too. I remember talking to Josh Alexander, casually dropping another name, one time, and I said, what do you think of me as a referee? You've never said anything. I've known him since before he was training, and he said, you know why you're a good referee? I never noticed you. That very day, I did the old man slow motion. He just knocked into me the least little bit. I did the most old man slow motion fall you've ever seen in your life. I fell over trying to save myself in slow motion, made an idiot of myself. And of course, Josh had just said how wonderful I am because you don't notice me. My worst injury, down in your way, St. Catharines, Ontario, crossfire wrestling against a man. I will not say his name because I've never told him he's done this to me. So the deal was, how kayfabe is this?
No, fucking nothing. It's not.
I can say anything?
Yeah.
All
sure.
right. All right. I did a run-in, and the deal was.
Did you blow your knee out like Mr. Man did at the Rumble that one year?
Oh no, this is a little bit worse.
Oh.
I ran in, and I was supposed to be. No, I'm not supposed to be. I ran in and got knocked out by one of the wrestlers. Okay, he just gave me a shot, and I decided to get out of the way, so I rolled out of the ring. Now, if you've ever been to Crossfire, the ring is very high, but I was able to do it, and
it's a big ring too, very large.
It's a big ring, so I rolled out, fell down, didn't hurt myself. I'm pretty good that way. Head down, like this. the 280-pound wrestler who did not know that I had been knocked out, hadn't seen it, did a move where he jumped out of the ring on top of my head. Well, I've been getting a needle in my eye every month since, because I had a stroke.
That doesn't sound like a malicious thing at all. It seems
Oh,
like
no.
an
And that's why I don't say anything to him, because I know he would feel bad. The bigger they are, the nicer they are, more sensitive. It would break his heart to know that he did
Crossfire Wrestling, 208 pounds. I think I know who this is.
Yeah.
Fucking Tomer. God damn it.
No. I'm not. I'll tell you off camera. That would be a Tomer thing to do. But no,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I understand, because
I love Tomer.
He's also one of those guys who, like, Tomer's also one of those guys who was just like, but always the nicest dude, like even to like new guys like myself. Oh, yeah. And like, I imagine he would just feel terrible if he did some of that. But
yeah, I know he's one of my better favorite people. So I mean, yeah, no, that was my worst injury. I still get a needle in my eye once a month. That happened in December 3 years ago. So it's been 3 years of a needle each month, and to drain the eye. And you know what a needle in the eye feels like? A needle in the fucking eye. That's what it feels like. It's disgusting.
So, I mean, all right, now let's talk a little bit about yourself, and not just wrestling, but like as a teacher, you have the privilege of seeing and developing young minds and seeing them go on and do great things.
Yep.
And as a referee, a man who's been doing it for 22 years, you get to see all these young wrestlers develop and go on to do big things. Josh Alexander, a prime example of that.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that you've taken from your teaching field that could be related to refereeing and vice versa?
I think just my personality. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of teachers, and all the politics you see in wrestling, it's in teaching just as much. And I don't even know what you do now that you're off the ship. There's politics everywhere. But my personality is, I've always believed that academics were secondary. Confidence and building up people's self-esteem is my big thing, and creating an atmosphere in my classroom for everybody to succeed in their own way and to feel good about themselves. Now I'm 67. My first class are now, and I taught grade 6 mostly. My first class come over for beers now, because they're 45, 50 years old. So it's that kind of thing. Same thing with wrestling. You'll never hear me, like, I see a lot of the referees, especially the referees that are really, really respected. They're very critical of you, and they'll tell you, don't do this, don't do this. I don't do that. I've never done that. I've always done, if I really, really saw a green wrestler, I might say, that was awesome. Next time, what would you do differently? Constructive criticism. Constructive criticism. I don't believe in the yelling and screaming, and I've had enough yelling and screaming at me in wrestling, certainly more than any other job I've ever had. Wrestlers, if it doesn't go your way, the difference is, the wrestlers, plan their matches or whatever, but I mean, they think about it 24/7. They're driving to the car thinking about what they're going to do in their match. They're acting, I'm reacting. In other words, I don't know what they're doing. I'm just reacting to what they do. So a lot of times that makes it really hard for me. So I have to I have to be patient with wrestlers, because they have an idea of what they want and I don't, so if it's a young green wrestler, sometimes I might say something in the ring, but very, very seldom. Most of the time, the only advice I give is, hey, throw them in a headlock and get yourself together. Because a lot of times they lose their place and they look at each other with, deer in the headlights. And when you see that spot, you just go, grab a headlock, grab an arm bar, do something, and get yourselves together. Yeah. I don't think I've ever said it to you, but maybe.
I've only had a cup of coffee on Ontario wrestling, and I'm hoping maybe one day I can get back into it, but who knows. Now, talk about, like, you said that your former students are now coming up for beers and everything. I mean, how rewarding is it to see these young men and women develop, both in professional wrestling and and just young men and women developing in their lives, sort of thing? Like, it's got to be such a interesting and like fun thing to see.
Well, like wrestling, teaching is a lifestyle. It's not a job. I haven't worked a day in my life. I taught, and then I wrestled on the weekend or refereed. I actually do wrestle too, not very often. But yeah, it is rewarding. And most of the kids that I've had, I only had one kid who we were oil and water, and he had such a big ego, and I'm more of a guy who likes the quiet kids, try to bring them out of their shells. But he ended up becoming a country singer, and he's actually on the radio and everything else. So I mean, and now we're friends. Like, I don't know what happened at that particular time, but most kids, I mean, it doesn't matter what they're doing. I'm just happy. You know, I've got two right now from my very first class, would have been in 1986, and they're going through as teachers right now at 45 years old. So I mean, hopefully that I'm a little bit of an inspiration too, because I mean, I started at 31 in teaching and 45 at wrestling. So I mean, I'm always late to the party, but you know, I started dancing in my 60s. I threw my first drop kick and trained wrestling at 63. So I mean, hopefully I'm an inspiration that way as well. But
so
yeah,
where does that attitude come from, do you think? Because like you're doing things because you want to do them, whereas a lot of people don't do things because they're afraid of how they're going to look, how they're going to look to others, sort of thing. Like, where does this attitude, like, oh, why not?
I mean, if you're in wrestling, Mitch, there's an ego thing. You must agree. And even though in the dressing room, you and I are probably the quietest guys in the dressing room. Yes,
I think that's my problem. I was never the quietest in the dressing room.
Depends what dressing room. Rock Solid was pretty quiet. But yeah, I mean, we all have an ego, and I like to be center of attention. I mean, I do. So I like to involve the fans, but as a referee, I probably involve them too much, because the dancing thing, I love dancing. I always have. In the 1960s, you didn't dance as a guy. There was a stigma to that. I mean, we didn't do dance routines, and, you might do a little disco or something, but I mean, really and truly. So now you look at TikTok and it's just Instagram, and it's dance, dance, dance. So I picked up Zumba, and but I do a little flossing just before the match. I'll do a little floss and I'll try to find one kid in the crowd, and I'll floss and nod to him. And a lot of times they'll floss back, and it's just a way to get them engaged and saying, hey, this old guy's not totally out of it, and may get the guys a chuckle. I never do it during a match, but I'll do it, maybe in that in-between time where there's, a little bit of lull in time, and try to engage the audience that way. Otherwise, TikTok, Eddie Old School, 1, 2, 3.
I remember
TikTok dances.
I remember I was reffing a match in Ontario. It was RJC versus Tiberius King, Jesse, who you probably know very well. And Nug was managing RJ City, and they'd had a spot where like they were taking a photograph with RJC, had King on the ropes, and I was like, get in the picture. And I'm like, no, I'm the referee, I can't do that. And then afterwards, like, oh, you should have done it. I'm like, but that's not what a referee does.
Yeah. You do what you're told in the ring. I mean, I'll tell you something.
No, I wasn't told to do it. He was hoping I would do it, but in my mentality, the referee's there to enforce the rules. So I had to count. I can't pose for a goddamn picture.
And it's hard right now
while the one guy's getting choked out.
Since Vince is there now, it's sports entertainment. And that's where there's a little tug, because my old veteran, territory guys want me to go this way. My young guys want me to do this. So I'm somewhere in the middle. But if they whisper to me and tell me to do something, I recently was in Oshawa, and talk about impact again, dropping some names, Cody Deaner, and I ended up being tag team partners. I know. And I wrestle, and I never say the word wrestle, I perform as Zumba King. So that's my wrestling name. You know what? If you ever come to see me, don't worry. I don't wrestle. I can lock up and do a few moves, but basically I do a little Zumba, have some fun. And that's what happened in that match. He called everything for me. So I was doing some arm twisters. It was against my very favorite wrestler in the ring, Andrew Davis. And I was doing arm twisters on him and all this stuff. And Cody's telling me what to do. And it's so obvious and not. So we didn't win that match. But afterwards, I'm standing there. This is where my respect for Cody Deaner went through the roof. Is he just whispered to me and said, how do you do Zumba? And here's Cody Deaner, champion on Impact Wrestling. And I'm saying this was a month ago. And he comes out and he does Zumba with me. And he didn't even want the match. When he came and found out that he was wrestling with me, it was like, oh my God, no. And there was my career kind of thing. So it ended up, he's such a good sport. He did it. So, I mean, he's fun too. But a lot of times wrestlers in the ring will whisper to you something. I did a thing with Jock Sampson and Little Guido from ECW. And they were doing a spot and they were killing each other and they hit each other with beers. But before the match, Guido says, make sure you get a beer. And he says, do you remember what Sandman used to do with the boom, 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 boom?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what he asked me to do.
With a glass bottle?
No, it was a can. So
Could you
no, it
imagine?
didn't matter because I cut myself open. I didn't mean
Could you
to the
imagine?
hard way.
That's the rib is they give you a glass bottle and it's
But the finish was Guido says, grab my hand. I grab his hand and we do the double elbow on Jock, 1, 2, 3, and I had to count it. But am I going to say no to little Guido? No, of course not. So it was a fun spot. He let me get a bit of the shine, and it was so fun.
And so, like you mentioned, Cody Diener, another guy that is like so well respected, not just in Ontario but
Tyson
worldwide.
Dukes. I got to throw Tyson Dukes' name. Tyson Dukes and Cody Diener are the godfathers of Ontario wrestling, in my humble opinion.
But Cody is also, a very well-known public speaker, and it kind of seems like you guys would have something like that in common, where you're both trying to like build people up, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Have you guys ever discussed that sort of thing in terms of like public speaking?
We're not really. You know how it is, and I said earlier in the thing, I said, the 5 guys in my career, like you're one of them. Especially with the Rock Solid group, I didn't really have any friends there, even though I was there a decade. I'm friendly with them. I'm acquaintances. I can say I've said 30 words in my life to Cody Diener. So, I mean, you're just not those kind of Rex Atkins and you, and there's a handful of other guys that Rob Swift, whatever his wrestling name is this week. Those are my friends.
It'll always be Robbie Reckless to me.
Yeah, I know. To me too. That's who I refereed first. I certainly knew him before, B is another friend and Skylar Rose, another friend. All seem to be in Niagara region. Of course, I live up in Elmville, which is, half an hour north of Barrie. So, I mean, I don't get to visit my friends very often. We've got a couple of guys up here. We've got D-Man's up this way. And
you should just go retire in Niagara. It's way better than Elmville.
Yeah. So,
I mean, just go.
As I say, so I wish I could say I sat down and talked about teaching with them, but I mean, there's actually quite a few teachers in wrestling. Darkstone and a few of those guys are teachers. So I mean, we've chatted a bit more. But Cody Diener, I mean, he's in a different league than me. I used to go watch him as Cody Steele, and back in the day, he was one of my first guys that I would actually pay money to see.
And so, to my earlier question, like you got to see Eric Young as the director, Cody Diener as Cody Steele.
I have never seen Eric Young. I've never seen Eric Young live.
Oh, really? Sorry,
I got introduced to him once at a Burger King by Cody Diener, but that's it.
But like you see these guys develop from these green wrestlers to now they're on TV.
Yeah.
And like, do you use those examples as like how people can, go through the shit, the mud of like wrestling and come on top and be great, like to your students?
Absolutely.
When you're teaching sort of thing?
You mean the wrestlers? Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell them, for instance.
No, I mean like to your student, your teaching students, because like you get to see these guys like I feel like a big thing with being a teacher is that you see these kids and they're struggling, especially now with COVID being a thing.
My son's a teacher,
and there's probably not a whole lot of confidence that comes from being a young person and being in school. Yeah. But you can take the element of seeing these young professional wrestlers and like, it's a hard road to be successful. And now these guys are being successful. Do you ever kind of take those stories and relate them?
I have. I mean, I've been retired for almost a decade now, but I'm in my 9th year of retirement. One of the perks of teaching. But yeah, I certainly used to have pictures of wrestling all over my classroom, and Asylum is also a teacher. He won't even tell anybody that he wrestles. But me, I used to put them all. I had every picture of Samoa Joe and everybody else up on my wall. And where it came in handy was parents' night, because the dads would be, they'd come in to tear a strip off me, and they'd look at the wall and go, "Is that Hacksaw Jim Duggan?" "Yeah." "Cool." And now he sits down and he's calm. It's like, okay, yay, that worked. And then we talk about wrestling the rest of the night. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see a Sean Spears and have the success, because just going in the ring with them, they're good. I was lucky enough to referee Beth Phoenix and Gail Kim in their early days, and Ali, and so, some of those ones, even Rosemary to a certain extent, as Courtney Rush and things. And you see the difference. You can just feel the difference between them and other wrestlers. They just have a drive. And that's what you explain to people, even the young wrestlers. I tell them, the drive they have, the attitude you have, you've got to keep at it. I mean, if you want to be a successful professional wrestler, whatever successful means, successful can be. And I try to tell them, I said, is there anything really wrong with having a reasonably good job and wrestling on the weekends? That's pretty cool. Do you really have to go? Because there's not a lot of options anymore. Now that A&E's there, it's certainly a lot, or AEW, it's a lot easier to get a job now than it was. There was that period there was WWE or nothing, because TNA was kind of such a secondary thing, and ROH, that there wasn't really a lot of jobs out there. When I first started, there was still WCW a little bit. It was sort of dying at that point, but there was still ECW, and there was a bunch of places, and territories were pretty well dead, but there was the odd territory still. So there was still, you could, make a living. I think what the people out there don't realize is, there aren't a lot of full-time wrestlers in Ontario. There's only 5 or 6 that I know of. I don't know too many who can just live off professional wrestling. That's the difference when I started watching wrestling in the 60s, where these guys were full-time wrestlers. Bobby Bass was a full-time wrestler. He wrestled in Vancouver, and then he'd go to the East Coast, and then he'd wrestle in Maple Leaf Gardens. So, he had those options. I don't know how much in the States he went. No, he did go in the States. I know he did. By the way, Bobby Bass is like the biggest star when we go to Vegas in Cauliflower Alley. Everybody's wrestled him or knows him. Like it's shocking. Like he is so popular there. But yeah, having role models like Cody and Tyson are important. And you tell the story. Tornado's another one. Tornado and Tyson at one time had more WWE matches than anybody else not under a contract. So they did really well, and our successes are a little bit more limited. So because we don't have the access to the States so much. So there's guys in the States who are on TV who may not be as good as some of the Ontario boys. It's just the way it is, and it's a visa thing.
So there, you mentioned the Cauliflower Alley Club, which is a very cool thing that I see you show pictures of and everything. And for people that don't know it, who might be listening to this, it's a Hall of Fame for wrestlers, correct? Or
it's what it is. It was started back in the day with Mike Mazurki and back in the 30s, and what it was just a dinner sort of thing of having a bunch of wrestlers together. And then what happened is, as these guys retired, they kept coming. So now all of a sudden you got all these retired wrestlers. So when I go down to Cauliflower Alley, just to give you an example, if I looked around the room, we draw about 500 on a good year, and sometimes 75 of those 500 are from Canada. And I've had a beer with Pat Patterson. I have, and Gene Okerlund. I've looked around the room, and they're, WWE usually buys a table. So at that table, usually is Sergeant Slaughter. Jerry Lawler might be there. J.J. Dillon from, NWA, and he's a regular. Terry Funk's a regular. Greg Valentine's a regular. So there's those guys, but you're not, I'm not going to be hanging out with those guys. My thrill, and this means nothing to you, I hope you have some listeners who are at my age. My thrill one year was I met the All-Star Wrestling guys from Vancouver, because that was one of the first national wrestling shows. All-Star Wrestling from Vancouver was all across Canada for years. And I met Moondog Moretti. I was so excited. So here's Greg Valentine over there. I'm going, no, that's Moondog fucking Moretti. And we ended up becoming friends, and we were having a great time having beers. I'm actually streaming. My first year there was Puppy Dog Pelican, who was a miniature Mad Dog Vachon from Winnipeg. So I started, and I met him, and I was saying hello, and we were having a beer. And I said, well, do you have any stories? Like, for, you were with AWA. Did you ever meet Hulk Hogan? He just looked at me and said, bring over a couple of pitchers. He's older than I am, and we were drinking by the pitcher. And he's telling me stories. He says, Hogan, that Hogan guy. Now, Puppy Dog Pelican was a little guy, but he said they put him in a couple of matches with him, and they said they had to lead Hogan around because Hogan didn't know what he was doing. And so that's the kind of stories you're getting, eh? And I'm just like in awe listening to his stories. And that's what you get down there. I meet the guys who are the enhancement workers. Bob Wayne is a really good friend of mine from Calgary Stampede Wrestling, and he'll tell you who he's wrestling. Tracy Smothers, that was like wrestling butter. It was butter, baby. In other words, he was just smooth and didn't hit. So he'll find some other enhancement worker, and they're just talking. I just sit there, keep my mouth shut, and listen to the stories because they're great. But you also get the new guys too. So I've seen, some of the newest stars, are there. And they always bring in some guest stars, and you get to take selfies with them. So I remember you were saying about the younger generation. One of my friends is Bambi Hall out in Vancouver. I've met her several times, and we've become friendly. My big thrill was I got to referee once in Ontario. But she was there, and Gail Kim was one of the guests. Now, Gail Kim and I haven't refed her in 25 years or whatever it was. But I went up to her and she says, "Oh yeah, I remember you," and whatever. And I said, "Can you do me one favor?" Because she wanted me and another friend to keep her away from the crowd once she recognized me. She says, "Can you keep away?" Only because I've got to catch a plane and I don't want everybody, if you could just keep people away. So we did that. I said, "Can I do one thing? Can I grab a friend of mine who would love to meet you?" So I went into the banquet, tugged at Bambi and said, "Would you like to meet Gail Kim?" And she said, "Yeah." So we went out there, and the whole idea was to elevate her. And I love Bambi because here was the question she asked. She says, "I'm here in wrestling. I don't know how to go up to that next level." Now, for a 20-something, I thought, what a great question. And it was. And Gail had nothing but time to give her, because she thought that was great that somebody would ask her, advice like that. And that's the hard thing. Everybody in Ontario gets to hear. I could name, 10 names of guys who should be down in the States, but they just can't get to here. And that's, who knows how to get there? Who knows?
It makes me, it's like being in Ontario and Canada in general. It's just like there are you have 365 wrestling, you have Smash, there's Alpha One, I think it's still in, but there's so many promotions that it's a shame from as a fan standpoint, we don't have a television deal, like a CBC television deal where everyone can see every promotion sort of thing nationally broadcast across all platforms. Because
that's what I was saying about All-Star Wrestling. All-Star Wrestling in Vancouver in the 70s and 80s as well was broadcast all across Canada on CTV. So I was, it was just local guys. Nobody really made it from there that I can think of. But I watched them and was like, "Yay, this is amazing. I love this." And you got to know the guys. Originally, the guys on that show were Gene Kiniski. You'd see Jimmy Snuka would come in, or Roddy Piper would come in. So I'm, John Leo Jonathan. That was in the 70s, but in the 80s, it had gone down to almost like an indie show. So it wasn't anybody super famous or anything, but that was fun too. And so, yeah, you're right. It made national stars of these guys so that they could go anywhere. Now, for instance, Von Vertigo, a local wrestler in Ontario, he's going to Europe. Well, he's got to promote himself. Now, he's really good with the technology, so he makes these great packages. And, he went up to the East Coast. He's going to the West Coast. He's doing 365 out there in a few shows, but he's got to promote himself now. So, the new technology has changed wrestling quite a bit. So, like you were talking about the AEW and all the lighting and all that stuff with WWE, it's a different program now, and it's lost that small.
And I think that's also part of I feel like everything's kind of I feel like AEW, there are impacts. The fact that the pandemic did happen, it's just kind of hindered so many people's opportunities in terms of being able to get to that next level, because shows had to be canceled. There's no exposure for say Jody Threat wanted to work with, I don't know, fucking Rosemary, and then but they can't do it now because of border issues or something like that.
Exactly.
It seems like they're kind of have the two hands tied behind their back and they're just kind of waiting, which is unfortunate. But I'm hoping, because all these talented men and women in our area are able to.
You dropped Jody Threat's name, and if she isn't the next thing, I don't know what is, because I think she is so talented and so much a cut above everybody else. Sorry, ladies, but Jody's just so much better than everybody out there right now in Ontario. Sorry, I'm causing shit here, but I don't, that's not really a secret. I've said that for a long, long time. It used to piss me off, but that's sorry. That's the way it goes. Jody's the best. But yeah, you're right. And I think I mentioned to you that the only shows I watch really, I like AEW. I do, and a lot of it's because, they have Arn Anderson and Tully and some of these guys. They respect the older guys and the new guys. So they like the new indie guys. I've shared, dressing rooms with a lot of those wrestlers, which is kind of, and a good Canadian contact with those guys too. So he must be helping paying their visas and things, or whatever the word is, green card or whatever it is. But yeah, I watch NWA. Why? Shitty lighting, old school feel, 150 people in the crowd. It's wrestling the way I grew up. And
And
I did the best count.
this is the new Billy Corgan run NWA you're talking
Yeah,
about, right?
and I watch it. I pay money for it. I pay, whatever it is a month, $5 a month or whatever. I pay it just for that 1 hour a week, and it's horrible sometimes. And sometimes you watch a match and I go, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, Ricky Morton's wrestling this week, and and then I tear up. I'm very emotional about wrestling. Like I really love it that much. And the idea that I've refereed Abdullah the Butcher and Jake the Snake Roberts and some of my idols is shocking to me. So I mean, I have that nostalgia thing, but I've also refereed the Young Bucks and MJF. So I mean, yeah, I've been pretty lucky.
I have this theory about life. And that's why I think you're such a great example to have on the podcast and why. But my theory in life is that like when you're on your deathbed, the only thing that you have left is the stories that you are able to tell. And I feel like
Absolutely.
have so many stories to tell and so many more. I think we'll have to get you back on. But for now, we'll kind of wrap it up now with this a few more questions.
Okay.
Before we wrap it up, though, where can people find you on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, all that fun stuff?
Usually like Instagram and Facebook at Eddie Old School will probably get you. I have a personal Facebook, but I would prefer people do the wrestling one. So at Eddie Old School on Instagram, and at Eddie Old School 123 is my TikTok. And on there, I do all the TikTok trend dancing.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
So for me, that's fascinating because like I'm not on TikTok, and the fact that a man who's like 20 years older than me is on TikTok.
Just got rid of my Snapchat. Sorry.
It's like, oh my god, like I'm that old guy now who's like, no, I am begrudgingly not going to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, I hear that all the time, actually. But yeah, so that's how you get a hold of me.
And so my last question to you right now is my last question to you right now. Two questions are you're a teacher, you're a professional referee. How are you now that you're getting more on in life, and you kind of mentioned how like you kind of want the refs to be in Ontario to be a little better? Are you looking into any modes of like teaching refereeing in Ontario?
I've been asked several times, but I don't think I have a lot to offer. I think when you've got Corderis in town.
See, I would disagree with that because like you have a different avenue because like you were a fan thrown into it, you've evolved. Like I feel like
I have things to offer. I think I would love to help. I mean, when Josh opened up a school, I asked him if he needed my help, but I mean, I don't think they see what I could offer. I would love to just do a half-hour chat with the wrestlers, new wrestlers, tell them, how to use me as a referee and that kind of thing. But no, I've never been used that way. And Harry D also, when I try to remember to mention him every time. He works out of Destiny in Toronto and everything. His experience is amazing. He did some WCW back in the day. He's refereed Hulk. He's refereed some of the big ones. People don't realize how much experience he has. He's 10, 15 years younger than me, but he has a million times more. And I actually talked to a wrestler once who said that Harry D grew up around the corner from the Tolis brothers and around the corner from Dewey Roberts. He said he's known wrestling since he was 5 years old. I can't compete with that. I can't compete with Cordero.
Yeah, but I mean, it's so you're trying to be humble. So, go fuck yourself in terms of that. Like, stop being so humble. Like, because you have the experience, you have the knowledge that you can help people. And there are so many promotions that just book someone that doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. And I'm a prime example of that. I remember being a referee for a match in Barrie, and it was like go home after 5 minutes because I was so bad, sort of thing. You know what I mean? Like those are the
how come I don't remember that? And I live in Barrie, close to it. So.
Or no, sorry, now at Barrie. What was it? Timmins, I think it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was Timmins, Barrie. That's only 1,000 miles apart.
It was the fraternity versus that TNA guy, Robbie something. I forget Robbie his name. E? Yeah, that guy. Yeah. And it was like it was a train wreck. But I could use some help. I could have someone tell me what the hell I'm doing, sort of thing.
If you get me on again, we'll talk about tag teams because tag teams are hell.
Yeah. And then so that's something I think you should get into is like teaching, because you have the teaching background, so you could know how to talk to people, especially young referees. I feel like that's something that you should get to. And also another thing I would say is may reach out to Hard Knocks Wrestling, because I feel like that's more your style of wrestling that you'd really enjoy doing here down in London, Strathroy. And my last little question for you here is with all the experience, like, do you have a favorite match that you watched as a fan and a favorite match you watched as a referee?
Okay, I'll show you though. I'll actually show you. Just a second. I'm going to pull a picture off my wall right now. But I'm really old, so it's going to take me a minute. All right. I guess I should have just moved my camera. But right here are my favorite matches. That was me with Ultimo Dragon.
Yep.
But there's my
Fit
favorite
Finlay.
match. Barry Ontario, Fit Finlay versus Harry Smith.
Wow.
So
That's a classic old school.
Oh, there's Rikishi. What do you know?
Yeah.
Oh, and Anderson, Kennedy. So, I mean, that was my favorite. Fit Finlay and Harry Smith. It was amazing.
How
Finlay,
old school was that match? I mean, I imagine that
it was
so
just
technical.
all grappling. It was all grappling, and Fit Finlay worked Harry and I totally. Halfway through the match, he says, "Oh shit, I broke my thumb." Harry broke it. And one of the things as a referee you do is communicate from one wrestler to the other. So work around the right hand because he's broken his thumb. Okay, all right, and then you just keep going. And at the end of the match, I said, "Well, how's your thumb?" "What thumb?" He worked us both the whole match. He had nothing wrong with his thumb. He was just being a dick. But that's the old school kind of fun they had. So I mean, he was just being silly, and what a match! It's my kind of match. I like that old style grappling. So
there you go. Jim Connolly, professional wrestling referee, teacher, Zumba king, TikToker. so many things that you've done in your life. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Hello, how are you today? I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you at the next wrestling show.
Absolutely, and if you want me back, I'm available.
Perfect. See you guys. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that podcast with old school Jim Connolly. If you remember earlier in the podcast series, I guess, I don't know if it's a series, it's just a podcast, I had comedian Ron Hay. Ron is also a teacher, and he has a podcast called The Teacher Hotline. And Jim's actually going to be on a future episode of that podcast. So stay tuned to that future episode of Ron's podcast with Jim. And as for me, I have a lot more guests on the way for you guys. So stay tuned, stay calm, and carry on. And we'll see you guys down the road. Cheers.